that issue at the moment, because ultimately, and this is a broader philosophical point, if I'm going to say to you, take responsibility for your nursing home, take responsibility for your vulnerable people, i.e. take responsibility for your lives, you're going to quite rightly turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, you're talking this responsibility, Dr. Lee. What about the responsibility for 1,000 people dying in Sandhurst Hospital and nobody gets sacked? And you're going to quite rightly going to turn around and say, what about responsibility in public office? What about responsibility in the civil service? What about the responsibility of those MOD civil servants who are responsible for a £37 billion overspend at the MOD? How many of them have lost their jobs?
How many of them should we have got rid of?
And I think that this whole area of responsibility, because we're all going to have to take responsibility for our lives, whether we like it or not. We're going to have to pay for things in the future that perhaps were paid for by others in the past. Okay? That's what's going to happen. That's the truth. But if you're going to buy into that whole idea of taking responsibility for your actions and consequences of your actions, then so should people who are being paid by the taxpayer to provide the services. And I think it is absolutely shocking that nobody has lost a job over the mid-Staffordshire. I read the Energy Bill Committee this afternoon was proven to be quite a soporific experience, so I opened my copy of an executive summary of the Mid-Staffordshire Hospital report. I tell you, if I've got my phone, I might read you a line from it, because it upset me so much. I emailed a colleague a line from the report. This report is quite remarkable, and it actually is a product of a system, of a culture that I think leads to a lot of problems in British society. This is an actual quote. It says, and please listen carefully, individuals and indeed organisations acting in accordance with a culture, even a negative or unhealthy one, cannot always be held personally responsible for doing so. Now, I think I've heard that defence before at Nuremberg. Individuals and indeed organisations acting in accordance with a culture, even a negative or unhealthy one, cannot always be held personally responsible for doing so. And that is in a report produced by a QC about a hospital in Staffordshire, in this country, in the 21st century.
How many people?
Okay, that could have been said about Nazis gassing Jews, I think. I was just a cog in a machine. I was obeying orders. The fact that the Nazis were in control and creating a really appalling culture, it's not my responsibility. And I think, I kept reading it, going, I'm sorry, that because there's a culture in place, it stops you being a human being. I mean, these managers, I just think, well, hang on a minute. I mean, you're getting paid. I mean, the current NHS Commissioning Board, I think he's paid about £250,000 a year, this former columnist. And I think to myself, okay, you're getting paid for taking responsibility, aren't you? You're getting paid that amount of money to take responsibility. The chief executive of that hospital gave no evidence to the inquiry because apparently he had stress-related illness.
Oh, what a shame.
Okay, specifically induced by his job. Now, okay, it's a tough job. Okay, I get that, but that's why you get paid 6 figures a year. He was being paid like 3 times more than I'm paid. I've had a pretty bad week, trust me. I've had a stressful week. Okay? Now, how come he didn't even give evidence, let alone the fact that he actually only retired, by the way, from a charity, I think a few months ago. He'd gone on to another job. It was such a stress-related illness that he was able to get another job. Now, I guess what I'm saying to you is that if as a society, if we're going to really go on about responsibility, and politicians are going to do it, then we're going to have to start being tougher on people in public office and in jobs of real responsibility running hospitals, particularly people who are paid significant sums of money. Significant sums of money. Now, and this is me being really controversial. question. Ask yourself, is it necessarily in your interests that I get paid so much less than the people that you're trying to get me to hold to account? As a society, that my role as a Member of Parliament, I get paid a third of what the Chief Executive of Bratton Forest Council gets paid, that I get paid a quarter of what this communist gets paid to run the NHS Commission Group. So when you read over the Daily Mail, I'm obviously a slacker, I'm obviously always on holiday, I'm obviously not doing a good job, and all the abuse that gets thrown and picked. And I understand the recent history that predates me. Ask yourself about how it can be that these characters cannot be held to account by me, apparently, and that I'm paid so little and my office is funded not particularly well in order to try and hold them to account. And ask yourself whether the system is right, the way in which I'm paid, me personally, that the role is paid, and whether that is the best interests of the country or not. Because I'm really convinced it is not. And it's a tough ask to go out to the public and ask for a pay rise. And trust me, I'm not suggesting you do it. But I'm asking you to reflect upon it, because I think the balance isn't right. Because a lot of these things come flying at me, understandably. I understand that. People are worried, they're upset, they're angry. But ask yourself about the type of person you want to be in a Member of Parliament role, be it this constituency or anywhere else, and ask yourself, how do you attract someone who's decent, just decent intellectually, thoroughly, but sort of decent as a character to do it, in order to hold people to task who clearly have a dereliction of duty, clearly should have been sacked. Because I really do think that it's a real challenge for us as a country, because don't think Mid-Staffordshire is a one-off. Please don't. I don't know who's next.
I think, just having on multiple subjects, I think it's interesting to compare what the MPs to the EU get paid. It's three times what the...
Yeah, I mean, MEPs get huge allowances.
Yeah.
They get
What
paid...
about the salary?
So
the actual pay is quite a bit more.
Yeah, there's a pay is more, but actually, I mean, I think I'm right in saying they get about £2,000 a month to entertain people for dinner. There are, you know, well, do you know what, Andy? I pay.
I say
if I entertain someone at Westminster, guess who pays?
Yeah. But they don't
do you actually think it's a business cost? Or do you think I should be paying out my salary? I mean, it's beyond me, really. I mean, when I sometimes wonder, but anyway, they do get paid more. Their allowances are quite significant. First class travel, everything else, of course. But I actually wouldn't compare necessarily with them, however shocking that might sound. I'd also compare with Bundestag members and members in Paris and senators and everything else. Look, I don't want to make this a sort of plea. I want a bigger salary. I don't mean it like that. I'm just making this point.
It's a priority issue.
I'm just making this point that if you want quality people, decent individuals, putting myself to one side, to represent you and to hold people to account, properly to account, be they in hospitals, schools, or whatever. 600 people, 650 people. It's not a lot of people. Okay, and I think as a country, I think we really do need to reflect upon that, because if we keep bashing, and saying they're useless, anybody who's half decent will just leave, okay, and then you'll end up with it either being a rich man's plaything, or you end up with lower caliber people doing it, and that's the road to ruin, I think. So there's a discussion and debate that the country needs to have, is my point. Anyway, Madam. I don't know, sorry.
Philip, a couple of comments. I'm sure the fireworks manufacturers will be very pleased about what you were saying, because I was at a trade show yesterday in the NEC, and they were all just standing around. No one was going to their stalls to buy. Everyone else was busy, but not the firework manufacturers. So thank God that that comment you made earlier has been dealt with. Secondly, I've recently stood down as a governor of Royal Surrey Hospital.
Yeah.
After 3 years, 3 very eventful years in the formation of the Foundation Trust. And thank God, not all trusts are the same as Mid Stafford. Royal Surrey's got no debt, it's very well thought of, very well respected, and looking potentially to partner with some other poorer performing trusts.
Yeah.
And that bodes well for the management of that trust. I was part of the panel that appointed the chairman, and I actually reduced the salary by 20%.
Yeah.
When he took office, and he's an ex-military man, he then voluntarily gave up a further £2,000 of his salary so he could put that into a pot to reward staff. And I think the governors at hospital trusts have a role to play in bringing the management to boot on this. And certainly, having spent, I'd say, 3 years over at the Royal Surrey, that is a very well-run trust. The last point I would like to make, which is the one I feel most strongly about, on Tuesday, I had a table at a school careers fair, and I saw an awful lot of young people that day who are trying to make career choices. And the head of careers said to me, Paul, can you talk to this young lady? She wants to get into your business. As it happens, I have a vacancy for an apprentice. So I had a good chat with her. Her parents then came along in the evening. I had a very good chat with them, and I believe she's going to apply for my vacancy. Unbeknownst to me, I'd got an email from the National Apprenticeship Service during that afternoon saying that they've selected another 3 candidates for interview with myself, which is great. But they said they rejected one because he felt obliged to apply for the vacancy because he gets his job seeker's allowance if he applies for a certain amount of jobs.
Yeah.
And I think that is awful because there was no way he was going to get from Bracknell to Woking, but he had to do it to maintain his job seeker's allowance.
Okay, I mean, there's some good stories here. Apprenticeship schemes up, employment in this country up, increase of 1 million private sector jobs since 2010. It's not all gloomy. I mean, there are some positive stories. In fact, the employment figures are quite they're so good you almost question. There are some contributing factors to that all around. Some people do shorter hours. And also companies have adopted a different approach in this recession of retaining people but reducing their hours instead of just laying off people. So there are some changes in the way in which businesses are dealing with things. But your point about, I think the point you're trying to make is first of all, a system that sort of incentivises people to apply for jobs they don't want in order to get a benefit is a perverse system, and I would agree with it. I also think that there are problems with work ethic in some ways. A colleague of mine got into trouble for suggesting it was declining. I would say that attitude generally between generations is showing some negative signs. I said as a GP. I think the sort of more stoic sort of 80-somethings are being replaced by less stoic people 10 years back, 10 years back, 10 years back. And I think the generation, I mean, can't personalise this, but just this feel that one gets in general practice is that people experience pain differently. I mean, I suppose if you've seen people die in a war or whatever, you live every day and you're thankful for that. And so your attitude towards pain and suffering is different, shaped by the experiences you've had in life. And I do think that there are the younger people now are not like younger people were in the 1950s. I think there is a difference. And some of that is playing out in terms of the demands being placed upon the health service and indeed the expectations of working life not being met. Can't be bothered, crap job, don't want to do that type attitude. When perhaps 60 years ago it's a job, I'll do that, and then I'll try and get a better job. And I think, you know, I speak quite often to my grandfather. He's 89 in May, and he did his 30 operations in the bomber over Germany in the war. And his perspective and his attitude to life is profoundly different. And most of the things in this country, most state, you know, the health service, the welfare service, relied upon stoicism. It relied upon people only using those services when they truly needed them. And I don't think that the current sort of generation value it in the same way, which will lead, I think, to it collapsing, because it needed that stoicism to prop it up. So you sort of touched on a few issues there about attitude, behaviour, and the perversity of government and incentives. And I think that I'll take back the thing about the job seekers allowance. Gentlemen.
Several questions this evening a bit related to health and health care. In 2015, we're due an influx of Lithuanians and Romanians, similar to the Poles. Each one who enters legally will have the chance to sign on with a doctor in this country. He'll get a national health, national insurance number. He'll be entitled to every benefit under the sun. Where he can get as much health as he wants. If he's got a family, he can have children here, and the children will be sent money for ones who never entered the country. All the time, you're saying we're going to have to pay more to fund ourselves. Yet we continue to fund other people who have never paid a penny. If this continues, and we have to keep borrowing more to add to the 3 trillion that we've already borrowed, to fund all these things, and the National Health Service, and I say national, not international health service as it's used now, how would the government, or any government, get out of this problem unless they say stop? And why do our politicians not say stop?
Okay, a number of issues here now, which allow me to sort of tease out. Immigration, most of the immigration into this country is coming from the European Union. Okay, it is actually the main reason people are going to UKIP. It's not actually, immigration is driving it actually at the moment, and I understand that, because the immigration that you referred to, I've seen evidence of in Slough when I worked as a GP there. I remember I phoned up a Polish young lady, because I got a message saying she wanted a maternity benefit form signed. And I rang her up, and a mobile number, and I said, oh, I've just signed your form, you can pick it up at the reception. And she said, well, I'm in Krakow. And at that point I realised that I was at the interface of the stupidity of this situation. The problem is the European Union, it is if you can claim benefits in the country where you are working. And then if you go back, you are entitled to the child, you know, there's a link. They don't claim in Poland because child benefit is lower, so the benefits are higher in this country. This is the problem. Now, you make reference to the Bulgaria and Romania situation. You're spot on. There's a lot of work going on in government, I gather, around trying to address this potential problem. But delaying things, changing entitlements, it's complex because the European Union legally, all these things are complex. I would counsel you, though, that not all immigration is bad. And I will give you an example of a gentleman I met whose business used to be in Bracknell. It's actually just relocated just outside the constituency. And he came in here with £4,000 in 2004, and his business in 2010, which is the latest figures I've seen, was turning over £16 million. Now, that's the type of immigration I like.
Yeah,
okay? And what we need to try and do is find a way of having a positive immigration story and policy, whereby you attract people who want to give, and you dissuade people who want to take. And I think that it comes up against our relationship with the European Union, to be honest with you. And the final thing I would say is, and the reason that you get the round of applause, is that I think, broadly speaking, you're saying, okay, we'll take the responsibility collectively, but we ain't paying for people who haven't paid for the things we've paid for. So actually part of the sort of overarching sort of vision policy implementation has to be stopping this situation whereby people come in and take having not given, because the public won't wear it. And that's why the response was so strong. And it goes back to the grand vision plan thing. You can't say, right, I'm going to deal with immigration like this, my European policy is going to be like this, my healthcare policy is going to be like this, and my welfare policy will be like this. You've actually got to step right back from it and go, right, what's the problem? The problem is, the challenge is, we've all got to be more responsible. Right, how do we become more responsible? Well, we've got to do this, this, and this. But if we're going to do that, they're only going to wear it if we do this, this, and this. And then you go, well, what's the actual policy implications of all of this? Leave Europe, to get rid of universal benefits for everybody, and that. You see what I mean? Your policies stem from having decided, right, we've got to make everybody more responsible as individuals. And I don't think that's how policy frameworks are being born in the Westminster bubble. They're actually just taking one area here. I'd say, well, we'll deal with gay marriage. Okay, we'll do that. And then, okay, what we'll do is the examination system. And they're applying different principles and values, and each time they're doing it. And the problem is the public, who often get derided as ignorant and informed and hardly interested in politics, actually, they can sniff inconsistency and incoherence from a mile off. And so to deal with what you've said, which I broadly, I mean, a couple of things I wouldn't necessarily do, because I don't think they can claim for children who aren't in the country, is that you actually need a coherent plan that's based upon values and principles that everyone can go, yeah, okay, yeah, responsibility, resilience. You know. And that's the challenge, really, because I want immigration into this country of people who can bring wealth creation and can actually come and contribute